persist over time.
In the Manila Bay and other bays that experience red tides, it is the marginalized that is affected in health and in economy.
Engineering is the ability to absorb, thrive, and then recover. The faster you're able to recover, the more resilient.
Sa Pilipino, ito ay katibayan at katatagan sa mahirap na sitwasyon at ang kakayahang bumangon muli.
Yung ecological naman, the ability to adapt. Yung evolutionary resilience, vale, to really innovate and be creative.
Resilience is really being able to spring back from adversity, but it should have learning, and therefore it strengthens you to be more resilient than before the adversity came to you.
Before COVID-19, the Philippines was already on to SMT-based measures to improve its resilience capacity. With COVID, the country was awakened to the need for resilience of our economic, health, and educational status as well.
The country as a whole is, I think, not so resilient because while we have the capabilities, the opportunities, and the resources to cope with COVID-19, the whole body is suffering because the leadership and management is not working so well. When it comes to individual resilience, those who have more resources, capabilities, and opportunities will be more resilient than those who are not.
A lot of the problems really may be interconnected, vale. You have to look at it from a holistic point of view. It encompasses more than natural sciences or physical problem, vale, but also it gets into the ecological, biological, as well as social pa nga.
Among issues and problems we have are poverty, ecosystem destruction, climate change, and variability.
Much of our attention is placed only after the disasters happen. What we should do really is to take early action years before the hazard strikes, and we should put our attention and our resources into that type of planning.
We need SMT-based transdisciplinary and inclusive approach to coping with possible hazards.
The fragmentation of society needs to be resolved for resilience.
Communication is very, very important, and we should communicate to the people using not just scientific communication means, but through arts, music, understand the mindset of the Filipino people so we can communicate better.
Well, the way to move forward is interoperability.
So we have to do a lot of work as a person, as a community, and as an institution to really have resilience as one of the values of the Filipinos. Yung tunay na resilience na towards improvement.
Building resilience requires sustainability science inspired by transdisciplinary approach.
To be sustainable, you have to be resilient. To be resilient, you have to be sustainable.
Go natural, go with nature's flow. Non-structural or natural interventions, as well as good planning, is the most sustainable.
Finally, we need to harness and strengthen the Filipino spirit of bayanihan.
Boys.
Isang magandang hapon po sa ating lahat at welcome po sa The Filipino Essay Action Hour. Samahan niyo kami ngayong hapon upang pag-usapan ang topic na Inconvenient Truth, Issues and Concerns about Genetically Modified Organisms or GMO. Ang ating po takapagsalita ngayong gabi ay ngayong hapon na isang retired Associate Professor of Environmental Science sa UP Los Baños, UP Open University, and De La Salle University, Manila. He has served bilang miyembro po of the National Organic Agriculture Board at consultant po for the Department of Agrarian Reform and was a lead author in the UN World Bank-sponsored International Assessment of Agricultural Science and Technology for Development. Siya po ay isang malakas na takapagtaguyod at advocate po ng sustainable agriculture at siya rin po ay naging patnugod at takapamuno ng masipag. And ngayon po, siya po ay sumusuporta po sa Asian People Exchange or APEX upang ipagtaguyod po ang larangan ng agroecology, climate resilience, and food sovereignty. Habang siya po ay nagsisilbi din pong board ng NGO board na nagpo-promote din po ng climate and agrarian reforms. Ang kanya pong field of expertise ay malawak. Kasama po dito ang organic agriculture, GMOs, and sustainable food system, supported by his degree from UP Los Baños and a PhD in environmental biology from the University of Guelph in Canada. So ngayong hapon po, let's all welcome Dr. Chito Medina.
Magandang hapon, Mark, and good afternoon to distinguished academicians. Good afternoon to all the listeners in this webinar. So I'm pleased to be invited to share some of my advocacies or perspectives here in this forum. So let me check. Is my slide okay now, Mark?
Yes po, sir.
Okay, so thank you very much to everyone who made their afternoon for this presentation. So as mentioned by Mark, my presentation is Inconvenient Truth because actually this issue of genetically modified organisms is a dividing issue, dividing technology, dividing science maybe among scientists. And so let me share to you maybe most of the concerns, the so-called unsettled dimensions of the GMO as a technology and as a development tool, whether it will be. So I have quite a long scope of or wider scope of presentations here. I hope you can bear with my long presentation. Maybe it may take about 1 hour. The usual claim about GMOs by the advocates, we need better yield to feed the world. We need safer food, better quality and cheaper food, environmentally sustainable, good for biodiversity. These are claims, but in my exposure and in the field about these issues, my experience is that they are on the contrary. In fact, about GMOs, they say that when they introduce the Bacillus thuringiensis corn or BT corn to produce its own pesticide, they say they will not need to apply pesticides anymore to control the pest. However, I will elaborate on that later on, but let me give you some details about that. That this BT corn is only good for corn borer, and there are about a dozen kinds of insect pests and about 6 major diseases, and therefore it is not correct to say that there is no need for pesticides. I will go into the details later on, but I'm still on the claims. They say there is no allergenicity, but here comes the debate about what is sufficient science or to base safety and what is incomplete science. One of the science contemporary philosophers said that about related also to GMOs and other uncertain technologies. It says usable knowledge, usable ignorance. Usable knowledge means the knowledge that you know from science, then we have to use it. But there are many things that we don't know yet in science, and therefore this is the ignorance. So maybe to be politically correct, not ignorance, but lack of knowledge yet. And that is we have to accept, because many pro GMOs do not accept that there are unknown aspects or significant aspects about GMOs, and so they push. Anyway, I will go into those things later on. So the other claims is that there is strict regulation somewhere else. There is it is safe because no one has died yet, kind of thing. I will go into this later on. There is more testing than any other crop or developed under conventional production, etc. And they said this is tested in the field, but most often these are misleading because they are mostly hype. In my experience, a data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture was saying that still that was quite some time already, but it is historical maybe, but the BT, Bacillus thuringiensis GMO, is contributing only about 3 to 4% of the increase in total production in agriculture in the US, while the rest, about 24 or 25%, is due to other factors like conventional breeding. And therefore, it highlights that it is not the GMO BTK corn in this case that's contributing much or significantly, but other factors yet. Anyway, it has a contribution, so that is acceptable, as it says in the data. Even in the Roundup ready soybean, which is a GMO soybean, tolerant to glyphosate or Roundup, actually there's a yield drag effect that is because of the glyphosate tolerant genes are contributing some physiological abnormalities, and therefore it's contributing to reduction in yield to some to the level about 5%. These are according to Science, Elmore et al. 2001. It's quite old, but again, these are given. In the Philippines, in my exposure, I was in the beginning, I was immediately involved in the campaign against BT corn because one, I was an ecologist and then I was in environmental science, and therefore the perspective of ecological impacts is different from the perspective of the biotechnologists, because the biotechnologists make the transfer of the gene happen and make sure that the encoded protein or product is there. But today, ecologists and environmental scientists, they wanted to know what would happen in the environment once you release the GMO into the field. What would happen in populations, communities of living organisms, and to the biological as well as chemical environment in the in nature. So the 2003 was the first planting because it was December in 2002 when it was approved by the government. In 2006, after 3 years, it's not GMO corn or BT corn anymore, but the Roundup Ready or glyphosate resistant corn that is encouraging more use of pesticides rather than reducing it because of the herbicide requirement to kill the weeds. So the RR corn, Roundup Ready corn, and glyphosate as pesticide glyphosate are inseparable. They are intrinsically linked together. To give you some data, again, this is not updated, but just to show you, this is the data. The thing that they said that they GMO, so you will not use pesticide anymore. So in 2003, this is the hectareage planted, the BT corn, to control corn borer only. And then after 3 years, they introduced the herbicide-tolerant corn. That is, it requires more pesticides, more of the specifically herbicides. So in that case, of course, at the later stage, they stack rate, it meaning they mixed or they put together the toxin BT as well as the glyphosate resistant or Roundup Ready resistant trait into the variety. And the hectareage is about 558,000. I think it's still stable until this time. About it ranges from 22 to 26% of the cornfield is planted to GMO until this time. Now, in terms of the beet eggplant, to again, it is designed to tolerate the so-called fruit and shoot borer of eggplant. That's the only target. But we filed the writ of kalikasan and continuing mandamus in 2013. So decision was in 2014 and 2015. So actually, the writ of kalikasan was we won that. But when they appealed to the Supreme Court in 2016, the decision was moot and academic. The writ of kalikasan is already moot and academic because the field testing is no longer being done. It is already stopped. So, but they said that the Supreme Court said that they need to improve the Department of Agriculture Administrative Order number 8 to enhance more safety testing and more processes of acceptability by people. And so that's the permanent gain that bring us into the regulation that is the basis of allowing release and commercialization of GMOs called JDC, Joint Department Circular number 1 of 5 government departments: the Department of Agriculture, the DNR, DOST, DILG for acceptability, and Department of Health. Anyway, to proceed with that, GMO BT eggplant was approved in 2021 already for direct use for food, feed, and processing by the Department of Agriculture and through Bureau of Plant Industry. And October 18, 2022, it was approved for commercial propagation. Then me as involved in development work also, we filed another writ of kalikasan. Maybe to me, I'm pleased to say, but maybe you would, some of you who are pro GMO would be saying, would be mad at me because I was also in part of the expert witness of the BT eggplant as well as the GMO golden rice in 2014, 15, as well as in this 2020. We filed that in 2023, 24. Last year was the decision of the writ of kalikasan. But now it is under appeal and at the Supreme Court. That's the same almost story with but more recent in GMO golden rice. It was approved in 2019 for direct use for food, feed, and processing. They approved for commercial release in July 2021. And we, together with the BT eggplant in 2023, we bundled together the BT eggplant and GMO golden rice to we applied for a writ of kalikasan for the field release and commercialization, wherein the Court of Appeals decided in favor of the writ of kalikasan in April, and then there's an appeal to the Court of Appeals in August 15. There is a final decision of the Court of Appeals issuing the writ of kalikasan and continuing mandamus, or continuing mandamus according to lawyers, continuing damage. And now it's under appeal again also in the Supreme Court. So, well, this is just the visual thing on when we were filing the writ of kalikasan. Now, let me move into the second aspect, the fundamental flaws of the technology. Pro-GMOs say that it is precise, but we concede that GMOs precise where they cut the gene by means of enzymes restriction nucleases and ligases to put them together. But it is not precise where the new GMO fragment of DNA goes, integrates into the receiving DNA. In that case, we say that it is not precise. It is unpredictable and unstable because there are some rearrangement of the genes and uncontrollable. Second aspect is that the pro-GMO were saying that G technology is for enhances biodiversity. But for me, having some background in biology, says that a species has its own genetic makeup, the so-called genome, that is just flowing within the species. But in this GMO, they're introducing fragments of DNA from other unrelated organisms. So to us, another way of looking at another component of biology to the ecologists is that is genetic pollution, not biodiversity enhancement. And there are many so-called pleiotropic effects, silencing of the genes, meaning they are not translated. The DNAs or genes are not translated, or overexpression and or co-suppression of other things. So these are uncontrolled and unpredictable things. So there are pleiotropic effects. And so it destroys the so-called gene ecology. In fact, another perspective now about genetics is not one gene, one protein hypothesis, but rather they are talking about the so-called fluid genome. Fluid genome, because the effect of the gene in terms of translation into its own products would be dependent on rearrangement, positioning effect, folding effect, silencing, co-suppression, over expression, and things like that. So these are the things that we need to know more. The debate actually has made something hotly debated thing, because um, the biotechnologists would say that we don't know our technology. But what the technology that they're talking is about the genetic engineering. But our science is more on the ecology, as I mentioned already, and environmental aspect, and therefore it's a different aspect of that. So that's one of the root cause of the debates usually. In this case, the golden rice in India had a so-called unintended effect, because the plants became dwarf and then short panicles. And then when they analyze it, actually the chlorophyll were reduced, very fewer, and therefore the growth became affected. Another perspective, this is from Jensen et al. Jensen 2004. It's quite some older, but the study said or reported that for every gene, it can produce 60 variants. And in the meantime, what the simplistic is the description of about the gene is one gene, one protein hypothesis. And in this case, there are variants, as I mentioned earlier, the positioning effects, silencing, suppression, things like that might be a factor about it. What I mean to say is that I'm not against the biotechnologists. The point is, these are things that they must study. They have to use science, because I said is that because of the overly passionate. For me, I became overly passionate in favor of environment. So in general, I was against GMOs, but the pro GMOs were passionate also. They are pushing GMOs. But I had a friend, Dr. Terje Travik from Institute of Gene Ecology in Norway, was saying before when we invited him here, saying a scientist has to attack the unknown to generate knowledge and explain phenomena. But if you push and if you promote a science, a technological product, you cease to be a scientist and you become a salesperson. Because of course, everyone we know, especially the respected academicians in this webinar at the moment. One element is in experimental sciences, so-called disinterested. I'm not interested, but I have to look at the variations and collect the data, analyze and admit what is to be proven by the data. But the point in this case is the proponents or the biotechnologists keep on pushing the technology and ignoring the data gaps that we are trying to raise that needs to be addressed in science also. In this case, I took of course, in most of my slides, I took the extra work to include the scientific literature so that to show you that I'm not speculating. I'm here just reporting the science aspect that are missed by many practitioners in the biotechnology aspect. That there's unpredictability of chemical composition, in this case, a GMO maize or corn. In this case, it says transgenic maize. There were 14 proteins out of the 43 studied, down-regulated, decreased. 13 were upregulated or increased. 9 became absent or shut off, and 7 became expressed. This data simply is that illustrating the uncertainty of the effects. And therefore, what it means to say is if we approach this in the scientific perspective, then we need to study more. Somebody has to study more of this, not trying to say that that is wrong or that is not existing situation. So that this will be additional work in science. So that's what we are arguing. At the moment, in the Philippines, actually, the Bureau of Plant Industries has approved 3 gene-edited banana, non-browning banana, and 1 GABA GMO tomato, because they have followed most countries in the world that gene editing is not GMO because they're not introducing the new genes, but it is not transgenic. Gene editing is not transgenic, and yet it causes the same effects as that of the GMO. There are inversions of genes, rearrangements, and cutting of genes. They call it chromotipsis to the things. So this risks or changes that happen uncontrolled effect about gene editing, because gene editing seem to be very precise, because you edit, meaning there's an implication that you improve it. But actually there are on-target and off-target deletions, as mentioned already, substitutions of DNAs, insertions, and rearrangement. The insertion can include the so-called promoter or CRISPR DNA and other the components. And during the cell culture, tissue culture, there can be damage because of particle bombardment, and the ones using the older method of genetic editing and some biochemical imprecision of the trait. So still there are many things that need to be addressed with science, and so this should be a very rich aspect of scientific inquiry rather than focusing on the promotion of the promotion of GMOs in commercialization and the use of farmers, because there are still lots of knowledge that need to be unearthed, exposed, so that we have a better decision making. The potential health effects of GMOs. This one, I took the picture in South Cotabato. He's a salesman of Pioneer then some time ago. And he mentioned the same thing. Why worry? Everyone has eaten GMO. He said, this man said, okay, get the GMO behind beyond our forum, and then I will eat. So the farmers took some ears of corn, they put in front of him, and so he has eaten. But when I speak before him, I said he's a good salesman, but he's not a good scientist because that is not the way how to do science. To do science has to have a systematic treatments of different exposures, the different volume of GMO corn that has to be eaten, and different time of consumption, a different duration, maybe 1 day, 5 days, 10 days, 30 days, 100 days, 1 year, 2 years, things like that. It's not only eating and then that's already convincing basis that to declare that it's safe. That is not science, actually. It's salesmanship. So I told the group then, he's a good salesman, but he cannot qualify to be a scientist. And also they are saying now in the advocacy globally that billions of meals containing GMO ingredients have been consumed worldwide without verified adverse effects. Precisely because no one is monitoring, no one is measuring the dose and response relationship. And therefore, in that case, again, this is not science in this scientific argument. It is a salesmanship argument. I have to speak faster because of my voluminous slide. In Australia, there was this published thing that a so-called harmless protein in beans, edible beans, when transferred to peas, which is also edible, and then they did some feeding tests. It has caused inflammation in the lungs of mice and caused reactions to other proteins in the feed. This is just to address the argument that this GMO is edible, and then you transfer a gene from another edible plant, then it must be safe. I think that should be more of, again, as I said, more of a salesman statement rather than a scientific statement. It is an so-called, it's not a conclusion, it is only an opinion, so-called, so to speak. Now, my undergrad actually was entomology, so I had some studies about this before. About I took also some insect microbiology kind of thing, and the proponents were saying that the BT protein, the BT GMO BT corn will only affect insects because the digestive system is basic in pH, and human digestive tract is acidic for digestion. But one study by Vasquez Pardon, it was a long time ago, has identified that, has reported that there is a binding site in the surface of the small intestine of the test animal, a mammalian test animal, a mouse. So, meaning if there's a binding site, it can be absorbed. And so the explanation there is that actually the BT insecticide naturally is about 1,155 base pairs of nucleotides. And in this case, this is the native one need to be broken into smaller protein. In this case, the toxin of 65 kilodaltons in the basic gut of insects. But the GMO, the BT toxin that was incorporated into the BT plant, is already active form that's still about 69 kilodaltons, and therefore it can also still already be absorbed by even not by basic pH, but also the acidic pH of mammals. So that's the explanation here and the difference between a natural BT toxin insecticide as well as the BT GMO toxin. Now there are data, so I have included, as I said, I told you the sources of this, that there is a the BT toxins are toxic in the blood of test animal. They are toxic to human cells in culture. And then another study or documentation in Canada, in Quebec, they said that they have found that a BT toxin was detected in 93% of maternal blood and in 80% of fetal blood samples of pregnant women. So in this case, it means that the toxin is already absorbed into the human body system and affecting, in this case, when you talk about ethics, affecting unborn children. So, shall we not protect unborn children? That's the ethical dimension. But anyway, don't have to elaborate on that because that's not the focus of our discussion at the moment. Some feeding test of BT corn had created more on the internal organs, kidney and liver, heart, spleen, adrenal glands, the stem cells, and the kidney. Actually, one of the debates here actually is that many of the GMO accepted GMO showing that it is GMOs are safe is that they are only done for so-called acute toxicity, that is 45 to 90 days. But we need to study also the so-called long-term toxicity or chronic toxicity that is during the life duration of its animal, as well as in intragenerational effect, meaning what would happen to the offspring of those consuming this GMO corn. No one has been doing those things except for one study by Seralini. That's I think the next. I'll give you to that later on. But the study on GMO corn and soybean has found that the ingested fragments of the promoter cauliflower mosaic virus has been found and incorporated into the blood, liver, and brain tissues of experimental rats. Again, I have cited the source here to show that it is a body of knowledge in science, not my opinion, but it's a conclusion by scientific studies. So the feeding of beet plant has shown many effects. The reanalysis of beet eggplant of Mahaiko Monsanto in India has shown by Dr. Gallagher, an epidemiologist, the environmental epidemiologist, showing that the ovaries and the liver as well as the spleen were affected. And therefore, these are showing impacts. Of course, this need to be corroborated yet. But the problem is that the proponents, those who are doing biotechnology, are pushing GMOs and then ignoring any adverse effects. So that's the dilemma. Of course, they are not toxicologists, but still we need more science. We need more studies about GMOs to ascertain its safety. In the meantime, we are lacking sufficient data to conclude safety of such biotechnological products as GMOs. The analysis of Dr. Amdo about the assessment of BT brinjal in India was he concluded that the analysis set a very narrow scope of environmental risk assessment, and therefore, because of the narrow risk assessment, the conclusion was okay. But in the real or more safety analysis, we should include the so-called, in economics, they call it externalized, so that we should include the aspect that are externalized as important aspect of the analysis. In systems analysis, we conclude that, we say that if you change the boundary of analysis, meaning you change those sources are included and excluded, that's the so-called externalizing environmental factors, then you come up with different conclusions than when you internalize or include such environmental dimensions. In fact, even economic dimensions. Of course, in the use of the Roundup Ready corn, the International Agency for the Research of Cancer has concluded that glyphosate is a category 2A carcinogenic, potentially carcinogenic is I think the description of that. There were lots of debates of this, but it came out that those who were trying to discredit the IEARC of World Health Organization is that they are supported by biotech companies to make the conclusion or the categorization of IARC, of World Health Organization, as not correct. But still, the IARC stood up to its conclusion. In putting together the literatures on the effects of glyphosate on health, these are the range of health effects that can be caused by the glyphosate. Of course, glyphosate is a toxin, a herbicide. A toxin is designed to poison, to kill. This case, glyphosate to kill the weeds. But of course, these are the effects, according to studies on mammalian test animals. In Sri Lanka, some time ago, there was lots of kidney disease, and they call it CKDS, chronic kidney disease syndrome. And they found out that because of that chronic kidney disease syndrome was coming from they were drinking water that were contaminated with glyphosate from a deep well at the middle of a farm, kind of thing. In the US, there is the increasing causes of some autism and other things that the court has awarded penalty amounts to the owner of glyphosate, particularly Monsanto, and awarding it to poisoned farmers and glyphosate applicators. A long-term effect by Seralini. He studied during the lifetime. I think it was about 180 days, 190 days during the lifetime of the test animal. So he came out with tumors of these test animals. So you can see this thing. Then many from different kids. It was retracted when a pro biotech became a editor of Food and Chemical Toxicology, but Seralini et al. Republished it in Environmental Science in Europe after a year. So that still this finding stands correct or stands accepted in scientific literature. Now we go to golden rice. The golden rice, the potential effects from our analysis is that there's incomplete information yet on the basic molecular genetics and biological as biochemical properties and stability. There are anti-nutrients because there are about 600 carotenoids. There are about 600 carotenoids, and those that are good carotenoids to produce vitamin A are only 3: beta carotene, alpha carotene, and one more. But there are about 600 carotenoids, and many of them are anti-nutrients because they have closer affinity to the place where they should be absorbed in the intestine, the internal organs and intestines of the consuming mammal. So these are not being characterized. They're not tested to preclinical to animals. And there's no, the safety assessment they only have is about comparing into chemical by database in computers about allergenic chemicals and the characteristics of the golden rice. And so that's not sufficient to us. The anti-GMO, they're not anti-science. They want, and we want more science as basis of a so-called educated decision-making. We use science, we must use science, but those who are pushing the products without sufficient safety data are the ones ignoring the application of science, and they're attacking the opponents of GMOs are anti-science. No, but I said we are not anti-science. We want more science and the safety data of such GMO products. I have to show you the is this beta carotene, is this GMO golden rice producing beta carotene useful? Scientific data has shown that about there is degradation of about 80 to 84% if it is stored 6 months. If the rice is stored 6 months, and 24% is degraded in cooking. The references are here. Now, the uncooked rice only has about 3.57 microgram per gram beta-carotene. If it is stored half of this, assuming that the relationship is linear, so half of the 80 would be 40% degradation. 3.5 with the remaining 60% would only be 2.14 microgram per gram beta-carotene. And when you cook, there is the so-called 20%, 24% degradation, so that the beta carotene per microgram per gram is only 1.63 microgram per gram. And yet, vitamin A, D, E, and K, so vitamin A in this case, are fat soluble, so that there's no fats in the diet of poor people, poor consumers. So the question of how much will be absorbed by the vitamin A deficient body is still an open problem to be inquired through science. So if I computed how much is needed by a consumer, a child and a adult, so the given in literature is about 250 retinol activity equivalent for children, about double that to the adult. But the range of conversion of beta carotene to vitamin A, that's retinol, you need about 12 beta carotene to produce one retinol. That's the vitamin A, active vitamin A. Erie has been using only half of that, 6 microgram per 6 beta carotene to produce one retinol. But literature in science says this is the conversion rate, 12 beta carotene per one retinol. And now, if you say the consumption of rice is about, it used to be 110, but now the government is saying we have per capita consumption in the Philippines is about 122 per capita per year of rice. But when it is 110, it's about 0.33 kilograms per day uncooked rice, or 0.8 kilogram per day cooked rice. There's a 2.4 increase when you cook the rice. Now you compute that for the children, 250 retinol activity needed with the conversion factor, then you need the beta carotene of day per day. So if and then with that, the uncooked rice should be equivalent for children would be about 1.8 kilogram per child to get all the vitamin A from golden rice. If for the adult, 1.8 times 2.4, that would be about 4. For the adult, you double that because of this 250 to 500, you double the 4.4 kilograms, then the adult needs about to eat about 8.8 kilogram cooked rice per day if the beta carotene and vitamin A comes all from golden rice to needed for the daily retinol activity equivalent intake. So that if you compute only of the normal volume of consumed rice per day, the person, a child would only get about 18% of the vitamin A requirement from golden rice, GMO rice. For adult, then you divide it by 2, then you only have 9% for the adult. And of course, there are other alternatives that can be used. And these are the listing of those with high beta carotene content that are naturally occurring. This is the beta carotene content on microgram per gram. Take note, golden rice is only about average of 3.57 microgram per gram. The malunggay, saluyot, alugbati, kangkong, these are the beta carotene content in microgram per gram, and this is the number of times higher compared to golden rice. So there are so many sources of vitamin A, and the golden rice, GMO golden rice, is nowhere comparable or competitive to naturally occurring sources of vitamin A. I have computed comparative requirements to get vitamin A rice, vitamin A daily requirement for a child and an old one, adult one. For golden rice, this is the amount needed to get the daily vitamin A requirement. For kalabasa, malunggay, carrots, saluyot, and orange na kamote, these are only in grams for the adults also, and kilograms for both child and adult. And so you see, while the GMO golden rice is a scientific success maybe because of making rice to produce beta carotene that is not normally producing under natural condition, and that is the case. But in terms of utility, this story is different. There are many more powerful, more useful, more practical sources of beta carotene and vitamin A. Of course, the problem is they are poor, and so there's no balanced diet. Poor. The environmental impacts, the next aspect is the environmental impacts. At the moment, we are in a debate in Negros Occidental because they're trying to, the Sangguniang Panlalawigan is trying to resign the GMO-free ordinance in Negros Occidental. And one of their bases is there can be coexistence between GMO and organic. But organic standards says that GMO is not allowed. And in this case, the potential contamination of corn is about half a kilometer, 530 meters, a study in this Iowa State University. And of course, it's subjected to different kinds of speed of wind that would determine also the distance. But it can also contaminate with even with 19 days planting interval, meaning even if there's a gap between the planting dates of the GMO and non-GMO of 19 days, still it can contaminate. So in Starlink BT corn, the contaminated corn in the US, about more than 700 million were paid to the farmers because of the contamination of their losses to their products. And Aventis, one of the producers of this, they have in recalling the contaminated GMO only for feeds, not for food of humans, and compensating growers and grain buyers and food companies. The estimate is about $1 billion US dollars in compensating those who were negatively affected. Of course, there are so many contaminations. In eggplant contamination, actually, here's my data. The eggplant, it's about eggplant is about 48% cross-pollination or pollinated by insects, and the pollen can survive about 8 to 10 days. So you see, even if it is pollinated by honeybee, even if it goes to the hive and then goes foraging again for the next 8 days or so, still the pollen can be viable. If it lands into a non-GMO eggplant, then it can contaminate there right there and then. And the honeybees actually can, in one flying for the foraging activity, they can fly as far as 4 kilometers. What does that mean? It means that within the 4-kilometer perimeter of the GMO eggplant, it can potentially contaminate that to insect pollination. So this is a big problem. In the Philippines, small scale farming. So you can estimate northeast, southwest of the GMO eggplant planted, it can contaminate about 100 farms in the perimeter of the GMO eggplant, in this case, without the farmer's knowledge and without the farmer's consent. So these are the dilemma. In corn, actually, in corn, it's not insect pollinated. It's mostly wind pollinated. But actually, one corn produces about 5 million pollen. The normal range of pollen in a corn plant is about 2 million to 10 million. So average about 5 million. Well, if you got the absolute mean, that is 6 million, but 5 million pollen is okay. And there are about 66,000 corn plants per hectare. And so you can imagine how much pollen is there willing to contaminate in about half a kilometer distance blown by wind. And sometimes, of course, there are accidental beetles, the insects that may land into the pollen, especially some that are pollen feeders, insects, and they can also accidentally contaminate. But even assuming for it is only brought transferred by wind to half a kilometer, and as I mentioned earlier, about 19 days planting interval is still contaminate. Uh, that's a big problem. Contamination by GMO is inevitable. It's just a matter of waiting for the time to happen, if that's the case. How about rice? The rice has been debated that it's self-pollinated. But the other ways of contamination could be through volunteer plants, meaning the seeds that fall on the ground, they germinate and grow at the same time as the normal crop, and therefore it can mix up with the population of a grown non-GMO rice, or seed mixing during drying, or in sacks wherein they store the seeds. Of course, cross-pollination can happen. I think the estimate to the rice breeders is about 10% cross-pollination potential. So integration in rice. But it has already happened. The contamination in rice has happened. In 2005, BT63 rice in Hubei, China, has occurred. In the US, LL601 Liberty Link, that's herbicide-resistant GMO rice, was contaminated in 2006, wherein the plant testing was, or field testing was around 2000, 2001. So it happened about 5 years later. Then this exported rice, long grain rice to Europe has been discovered to be contaminated with this GMO. And so Bayer was fined to pay about 750 million to about 11,000 farmers who lost into this kind of rice contamination. About in June 2021, a rice from India was found to be contaminated when they exported it in the European Union. And so this already happened. And so it's, as I said, the contamination is already waiting for time to happen. And so at the same time, so that in the farming, in the market, coexistence is also not possible because there is no segregation and labeling of GMO and non-GMO. And so it violates the consumer's rights to know the content or composition of what they are consuming. And the glyphosate aspect, I have mentioned about the glyphosate already a while ago, but this and the environment. So that's the contamination of other things. My question here, as a biologist also, is that how much will you put as a value to a variety that has been developed by farmers and contaminated and lost forever? It is invaluable. So that's a big problem. And then clearing areas not suited for cultivation and many things like that. I think I have to. We did a study in Ginbialan, Maayon Capiz. I was the study leader here, and we did rapid test only, rapid field testing. We studied the soil, water, and corn seeds, and some about 3 farmers volunteered their urine to be studied, and we found them positive or detected them in soil, in water, in corn, in all this medium or media before planting, after planting, and before harvest. Actually, when I tried to put together the data about glyphosate, the herbicide used in runoff ready corn, is that it takes about 4 to 180 days in the soil for to degrade, and then there is a strong chelation to other elements in the soil, meaning it will be more stable if it binds strongly to calcium, iron, and other elements in the soil. And then the glyphosate may go to the water, and it takes about 28 days to eliminate 50%. That is the so-called half-life. And then it is glyphosate is converted chemically in environment, in water, to in AMPA, amino methyl phospho amino acid, amino acetic acid, and it takes about 76 to 240 days. So it takes about 16 about 180 days, meaning about 6 months, so that if the degradation of average degradation in water and soil of the glyphosate is 6 months, then if there's two cropping season per year, it means to say that any time of any day of the year, there is glyphosate in the soil, especially in some water, especially if they're stagnant, and also in this case, and always go to the effect into humans. So these are the complexities in environmental systems. This I took this picture when we also did some study. This uplands, these are not intended for annual crops. These are all grown with RR corn or GMO Roundup Ready corn because of the efficacy of the glyphosate at herbicide. So they can spray in the mountains, they clear the vegetation, and they can plant there. But after some time, you see, then there's the rapid severe erosion, and in this case, even the native, even tall trees like coconut are dying somewhere here. And you see the severe erosion here. These are all planted with GMO corn in Maayon Capiz. A study, Dr. Siringan yang from UP Marine Science Institute gave some comments when there's flooding in Alcala, Cagayan in 2020. And among other things, he also associated with the clearing of uplands to plant yellow GMO corn that you utilize as herbicide. So you remove the so-called cover crop, and therefore you expose, or the soil is exposed to the impact of falling rain, and therefore there's faster soil erosion. And so with that, the aggregate effect will be flooding and dilulan. There is a study somewhere in Bukidnon, and the GMO corn areas is 3.7% point more likely to be hit by a landslide than those planted with other corn varieties. So the probability of landslide is 6.2% points higher when corn is cultivated, going from non-GMO corn to further increase with about 3.3 percentage points. So there are studies already in science showing the environmental impacts of this. In terms of pest control, the evolution of weeds resistant to glyphosate has been documented in those, especially in the US and Argentina. And there is past evolution of resistance when in ecology there's the principle of the higher the selection pressure, meaning the more toxic and permanent the toxin, the faster is the evolution of resistance. So in this case, for bollworm has happened. I think this is in India as well as in Indonesia. Also here, BT corn. We have some experience in Bicol and Iloilo before. and they're attacked by other insect pests. This is called among entomologists as secondary pest outbreak. Socioeconomic effect. We were in a forum in General Santos City during the processing of the application of BT corn. I happened to ask the farmers, about 150 farmers in the hearing, what is your major problem? And so they say, low price, high expenses of cost of inputs. And so I said, it looks like the solution of BT corn and the problem of the farmers do not fit together. As if you are eating biogesic to cure stomach ache, or you are using a medicine for stomach ache to cure headache, and so they don't fit together. So I said, then we must more assess what is the real problem that we wanted to control. In terms of this pricing, uh, the runoff ready GMO corn is very expensive. A normal hybrid corn of the same company is only less than half of that of the GMO corn, and therefore it translates to more expenses to the farmers. We did a national study 10 years after the planting of GMO corn, and we found that the external cost, the product of seed companies, biotech companies, chemical companies, seeds, fertilizers, and herbicides uh, has increased, and the cost of planting per 1 hectare is about 61,000 to 71,000 pesos. That's very expensive actually, and the gross sales of GMO seeds is about 11.7 billion per year. This is only seeds alone. This is the business of the seed companies, biotech companies, and the glyphosate sales about 0.2 billion per year using the so-called hectareage of GMO corn. And the the net income, gross income and net income, subtract the total cost from the gross income. The red here are lugi. They are deficient in terms of income. In Isabela, Pangasinan, Iloilo, Capiz, Bukidnon, South Cotabato, and Sultan Kudarat, the highest level here of income is about 11,000, 13,000 per hectare. So that's too low. If a farmer has 13,000, 14,000, round it off, 14,000, but the growing season is 4 months. So 14,000 divided by 4 is only about more than 3,000 per month that is used for the economic needs of the farmer. And this for self-finance. And when it's on a loan basis, you see so many red here, meaning deficit, meaning the cost of production is more expensive than the gross income in many instances here because of the interest paid in the loans. So now there is a study. Many pro-GMOs are saying that there's an increase in income. This study is I think it's a PhD student from in the Netherlands. This is a student from, I don't remember if from Isabela or from Ifugao State University, and that the conclusion here is that the GMO, non-GMO are not statistically different in terms of net income, production cost ratio, and return on investment. In India, they have a different culture. Those who are losing on becoming bankrupt on BT cotton, they committed suicide. I think I have to make it faster because of the time management. So farmers who started planting GMO corn, GMO seeds, say if you buy the seeds will make you buy the herbicides, the fertilizers, and the seeds for the next planting. And this is a picture I took it from Sara Iloilo, San Dionisio, Iloilo. And you see, this was a former rice corn farm, GMO corn. It has been taken over by a nagpapautang, and it is now being fenced by the businessman who provided loans because the farmer wasn't able to pay the loan and the interest. The political economy, this is beyond science, but you see, these are attached to things that the control of corporations through legal means and technological means, so that these are actually problems to surviving small scale farmers. Now, the production of GMO, initially, well, it may have been cheaper now, but it used to be about $75 million to $150 million to produce one GMO. In the normal breeding, about $1 million US, that's about 58 million pesos. I am involved in a farmer scientist partnership for small scale farmers, and we are teaching farmers to breed rice, and the expenses of the farmers are almost none, only the sweat of the farmers. So that's the difference between things. The point that I'm trying to say here is it's too expensive, that maybe we need alternative technology that are cheaper to do, and so that we can produce more technology. I have to make faster. My time is almost. In terms of the regulations, there is substantial equivalence among the proponents, but this is not scientific thing. That's why we are invoking the so-called precautionary principle in contrast to substantial equivalence. Substantial equivalence meaning they're similar, the same, the GMO and non-GMO. But if they are the same, how can you patent them? That's the logical question. How can you patent if they are equivalent? The GMO and non-GMO are equivalent, and these GMOs are patented. So there must be some uniqueness of this. Principle of familiarity, comparing with known other allergens, but they're database only, not toxicological testing, and things like that. So in fact, this is my metaphor, corporate commandment through patents, that no food shall be grown that you don't own, because they are all patented. GMO is a tool to patent the seeds to make the public property, common property, into private property by corporations. Regulatory issues, we have no explicit budget law on GMOs at the moment. So when there is contamination at the farm, who will pay? Is it the owner of the patent? Is it the BPI, Department of Agriculture, that allowed commercialization? Is it the LGU, local government unit, who allowed field testing? When consumers get sick, who will be the one to be responsible for the illness of people who get sick by eating GMO? Meaning these are legal aspects that need to be addressed through legal legislative processes. I was so upset because I was teaching also environmental risk assessment in graduate courses in environmental science before, and the environmental risk assessment, they put it in 2 pages, and this is the only questions that are being asked. What would be the activities, the loading, transport, storage, processing. What is the potential impact? There's nothing, and mitigating measures not applicable. And then the conclusion in this data is that the GMO is at substantially equivalent as the non-GMO in terms of environmental risk assessment. You said, if you use logic, you cannot conclude that. If you use science, you cannot conclude also, because there's no data to base your conclusion, as they are the same. In the health impact assessment by the Department of Health, 44 questions out of 48 questions were answered not applicable. The only ones that were answered were those basic data of what is the GMO, how it's derived, things like that. But the substantial assessment, these are the answers not applicable in this context of the food feed and processing application for uh, national approval. So again, the conclusion is it is safe as the GMO BT, GMO golden rice is the same as non-GMO. So I said, logic, there's no basis to, there's no premise to make the conclusion. In science, there's no data to make the conclusion. And yet they made the conclusion that it is as safe as the non-GMO counterpart. And therefore, this is areas to be improved. Maybe this is more on the bureaucratic dimension, not on the scientific dimension, but still it has to be addressed. Well, there are some local government with GMO pre-ordinance. The former Director General of IRI, Dr. Swaminathan, and one of his colleagues has published and saying in general that there is sufficient evidence to question uh, the efficacy of GMO crops in terms of yield, pesticide usage, effect on farmers and the environment. In more than 99% of cases, there is no need for GMOs. Time and honored conventional breeding is sufficient. So you see, Swaminathan, the Director General of IRI before, has been enlightened about alternatives. So there are impacts of GMOs on farmers and food security. Will not alleviate poverty, lower yield, lower income, contamination of varieties. Farmers will not be allowed to save in exchange, sell and save seeds. So it creates dependency to transnational seed corporation. So we say beyond science in the political dimension is GMOs are tools for corporate control of food and agriculture. Feeds profit to seed companies, expensive to small farmers because they're patented. They're not produced for food. It increases cost to farmers and risks to environment, diversity, human health, economic failures, and other things. As a postscript, in Mexico, they've opposed, despite the lobbying of the U.S. government and biotech companies, they've stopped GMO corn because that's their staple food, and they replaced GMO with native corn in Mexico. In Peru, they have a 10-year ban on Monsanto. I think that's my last slide. So thank you very much for your attention, and my apologies for the very long presentation. Mark?
Ay naku sir, kahit po medyo mahaba ang presentation, ay napaka-insightful po naman at ang dami po namin natutunan ngayong araw. Ngayon po, totoo po yung sinabi nyo sir, sa panonood po ng inyong presentation, talaga pong meron pong nakatagong inconvenient truth ang GMO. So right now, we're going to open the floor sa ating pong mga panelists, attendees, at ating pong mga audiences na meron pong mga gustong ibahagi o gustong itanong sa ating pong eksperto. Teka lang po. Ay, ano ko lang po to. So meron po ba tayong katanungan? Sir, siguro po, umpisahan ko kasi totoo lang po ang ating pong mga audience. Linggo-linggo po sila po ay mahiyaing magtanong. So, sir, tanong ko lang po. For the sake of food security, na kailangan po ng population po natin o ng ating bansa, do you think yung pong issue po ng anti-GMO saka mga pro-GMOs, can they coexist? Sir, nakamute po tayo, sir.
Sorry,
po, sir.
sorry. As I said, in the long term, there's no direct answer to that. But in the long term, we need more science. And when we have the science to prove their safety and some designs to mitigate any adverse effects, then we can allow GMOs. But in the meantime, there are still so-called many aspects of unknown that we wanted to know to make a informed decision making. So that's one. With the need for more science, especially on the safety, health and environmental safety. But the problem, the second one is contamination, biodiversity contamination, and biological contamination, they increase over time. While, in fact, I'm not saying that chemical contamination is better, but in the environment, chemical contamination, the chemicals degrade. But I'm not in favor of the chemical also, but I'm just comparing the two. But biological contamination, they increase because of biological system. They cross-pollinate, they propagate, they reproduce, and therefore we say that the best um, stage to stop contamination is not introduction, it's stop introduction. And secondly, uh, why do we have to be pushing so much about GMO and trying to look at marry them together, meaning the sustainability, other aspects, and GMO, when there are options that can be done. Feeding the world is one thing, but up to this time, about 40 years now, since the first planting of GMO in the US, there's nothing for food. GMOs were not for food. In the US, corn is for making biofuels and feeds. Of course, indirectly it may be food because as feeds for animals, livestock, it ultimately goes to human. But again, there's no directing on food yet substantially. And so, to me, I refuse to, at the meantime, because of the lack of the knowledge and science about addressing the concerns, I would say that we need to put more attention into alternative approaches. Myself, including one of these, Dr. Ted Mendoza, we started a alternative farming systems in way back in 1986, 85, 86, 87. Although he retired now, Dr. Mendoza has retired now, I'm still supporting the so-called Farmer Scientific Partnership for Development. We have more than 2,000 rice varieties, 2,000. And we teach farmers how to breed rice and corn and native chicken so that we can also make, of course, they may not qualify to the varieties that a scientist may have done, but the point is there's something that can be used by the farmers themselves, especially that they're small scale farmer, they're poor in terms of financial assets, and therefore there are alternatives that are not expensive. I said, if it's GMO is owned by a seed company, and actually to me, to us, GMO is only pushed because by biotech companies because it is patented and it is towards patenting privatization of the global commons. In environmental science, you said that even air will be privatized. Water has been started to be privatized because of the so-called mineral water, etc. So the global commons are becoming privatized, and we are trying still to develop a maintaining that global commons. No patenting of seeds, no patenting of life, and things like that. But this is for us only. We are not imposing on anyone. But the point is, we've made alternatives. We are not only opposing, we are making concrete alternatives. So that hindi lang kami against, kundi kasi kung tatanungin ng mga policy makers, anong alternative nyo? So we have something as alternative. In organic agriculture, as a sustainable for the soil fertility, soil life, because life, they say that the soil is living. The microorganisms there, of course, the organic matter. In that case, actually, we want to make it sustainable, but the GMOs, they are not sustainable in this case.
Yes.
So those are my simple things. In the meantime, we because of the lack of scientific data, we cannot reconsider the position, and therefore the demand is more science. I think
Yes,
that is
sir.
acceptable to the academicians here. More science is what we need,
So sir, as
especially.
long as yung pong ating pong aim for GMO sa tingin niyo po ay nakafocus more on profit, so medyo matagal-tagal pa para mag-coexist ang pro and anti-GMO. So
Oh, at
sir,
saka, let me raise pa yung sinabi ko kanina, kung kailangan mo ng something like $75 million to $150 million to produce one GMO, and now the processes, the genes are patented by the biotech corporations. Meron na ba tayong GMO sa Pilipinas? Wala. In fact, sorry to say this is not to this is a personal one, but we are becoming second-class citizens if yung dinevelop ng Monsanto ng Pioneer at Syngenta, yun na lang tinetesting natin sa atin sa Pilipinas. Bibreed lang natin sa BTK eggplant. Binid lang nila sa native eggplant and tinetesting sa field. We're not developing any GMO in our own because it is expensive. The processes are being patented. So you need to pay royalty fee to the owners of the patent also, as well as the so-called other payments to them. But anyway, I'm not trying that we have to turn our back to GMOs in the meantime. In science, we need more science, as I said. No problem about it. But not the commercialization.
Yes, sir. Sir, naalala ko tuloy ang aking professor dati sa agronomy na si Sir Pete Guzman na I think, sir, kilala niyo siya. Sir, anyways, mapunta po tayo sa question po ni Mr. Marvin Tejada. So, paano daw po natin scale up ang food production of the country grappled with increasing population and urbanization that needs affordable and accessible nutrient food source? So, sir, sa palagay niyo, sir, without the use of GMO, kaya po ba natin ma-scale up yung ating food production?
Yes, actually, I had been into this for a long time already. And so, as I said in my brief CV, I'm into food and agriculture transformation, or so-called food sovereignty. And sometimes in some of my income, while I respect the position of the academicians here in Need More Science, but I said also that for the knowledge, for the technology. But sometimes when it is for useful for farmers, that is called knowledge deficit model. So we need more technology. But there is also the so-called democracy deficit perspective that we need to involve the farmers in developing technology, in focusing the kind of technology that they develop. And of course, there are other problems like capital, or the land is not theirs. And in fact, many of those who are poor in the Philippines are farmers and fisher folk. If they can only own the land and they don't buy the seeds, then they can produce food for themselves, survive. In most cases, it's agribusiness that is dominating. But actually, there's a global data that 70% of the food produced in the world are produced by small-scale farmers. But they are not reflected in government statistics because they are not sold in the market. They consume it because they are poor. But the point is, we are feeding the hungry by helping them produce food for themselves. But anyway, sorry, I might have been shifting away from the question, but can we, how can we depoliticize food production? Actually, there was a study in our farmer scientist partnership approach. An anthropologist from Ireland for his master thesis said that the choice of farmers to plant organic and to avoid buying, because they cannot buy chemical fertilizers and pesticides, is also a political act, because it is a choice of what they can afford. And if they cannot buy, and they will not buy the seeds and fertilizers and pesticides, chemicals, then they will not be, I mean, it's a decline into the income of the big corporations. agrochemical corporations. But anyway, then they should produce locally available fertilizers. I have come across a global food security. It was assessing that if we go into nitrogen fixing bacteria and other microorganisms, it can contribute much to the production of the needed nitrogen fertilizer, which is the more labile, more volatile elements of the plant nutrients. And also, the amount of food production at the moment, or some years ago, is enough to produce to feed about 9 billion people. We only have about 7.8 billion people, I think, at the moment, and therefore there is still surplus food production. The point is, the hungry people have no money to buy the food, or they have no land to plant the food that they can consume, and so the problem is somewhere else, not on the technology actually. And so, or if there is a technology, we have to put them side by side with the socio-economic and political dimension. We are pushing agroecology, and in agroecology, there are 4 dimensions: technological sustainability and productivity, economic profitability, sociocultural acceptability, and political. Who controls the inputs? Who controls the seed? Who controls the inputs of fertilizers and pesticides? If the farmer produces the organic fertilizer, then they will not be buying anything. If they own the seeds, they will not be buying the expensive seeds, and therefore there is bawas yan sa kanilang gastos, and therefore there is higher net income. And so the net income is the more important thing than the gross production in the farm when it comes to addressing hunger and poverty. As I said, I was involved in the International Assessment of Agricultural Science and Technology for Development in 2005 to 2008. Some of the conclusions, there is an increase in production of the chemical farming is at the expense of the environment, there is pollution, and social equity. Second, marginalization of the small-scale farmers is no longer tenable. We need alternative approaches, and agroecology is one approach. And thirdly, among the 21 summary for decision makers is that it says business as usual is no longer an option. The chemical farming is no longer an option because it is not sustainable. You talk about nutrient deficiencies, nutrient imbalances in rice fields because of continuous utilization of so much nitrogen kind of things that it becomes acidic, that availability of nutrients become hindered in many of the nutrient needed. Anyway, so we can enhance, but somebody is raising his hand. We can enhance the thing. I have done that in experience working with farmers. In my organization, we are working in 63 out of the 82 provinces in the Philippines, involving about more than 500 farmers organizations and about more than 50,000 farmers that are involved in our activity and more sustainable farming system. That is, we are trying also to develop local farmers market. Organic farmer market is even better because if it is a local farmers market, 100% of the income goes to the farmer. If you sell it through institutional buyers like supermarkets, 80% of the income will go to the supermarket and only 20% goes to the farmer. And there is lots of so-called rejects because of type, some blemishes or some bruises, and therefore there's lots of food wastage because they don't meet the standards. But in farmers market, kahit may kunting gas-gas, kahit mas malaki kaysa normal, mas maliit kaysa normal, binibili pa rin. So maganti, marami, it's a complex thing. I have been into systems analysis also for some time. So we have to look at that in the more integrative, multidimensional perspective. Somebody's raising the hand.
So sir, masabi ko lang din po na we have the science when it comes to food production and food security. It's just that kung hindi po tayo titigil sa pagboto sa mga leader po natin na handang mag-convert ng lupa into subdivision at mag-approve ng mga export ng ating mga pagkain abroad, import I mean, as long as sila po ay namumuno po sa atin, mahirap pong ma-achieve ang food security. Anyways, let's go ahead and go sa question po ni Sir Ike.
Good morning, Dr. Tito. Good evening pala. Sinasabi niyo po ba na hindi na natin kailangan ng GMO? Kaya na nating mabuhay kahit walang GMO at parang pinagluloko lang tayo ng mga korporasyon na yan?
Tama po.
Yes, in the meantime, I want to answer that straightforward. In the meantime, we don't need GMO. There is no contribution of GMO yet in our food at this time in the Philippines. Well, we are importing contaminated or mixed, unlabeled, unsegregated GMOs. But again, we have the solution is not technology. It's about the interacting aspects of economic capacity, control of inputs or availability of inputs, landlessness, support of the government to them. We will be able to produce sufficient food for the whole Philippines, I suppose. It's so easy to compute food security. I've been doing this informally in some aspects. If you want to see the rice, the per capita consumption of rice, 120 kilograms per capita per year, you multiply that with the population, and then on the other side, the resource base, you compute the hectareage of rice, how many cropping, one cropping, and how many are two croppings, what is the average yield, and then the milling recovery of about 60-62%, and then you can compute the production of rice, and then you can see what is needed more to balance the consumption and the production. The problem in rice at the moment is, as you have seen in the hearings in the Senate, it's about they now are becoming accepting that the rice tariffication law, more importation and reducing the more importation is killing the farmers because the over importation that may porsyento ng mga nag-import, may collection dyan. Tapos ay oversupply, bumagsak ang presyo, ang mabayiba yung bumabagsak ng 10 pesos, 12 pesos per kilo ng palay and milled rice. Si Dr. Ted Mendoza, siya nagko-compute ng mga ganyan sa rice, sabi niya ang average, ang selling price dapat ng rice na palay, sabi niya more than 20 pesos, 23, 22, 24 pesos yata ang computation ni Ted, Dr. Ted. So, siya ang authority dyan sa computation ng mga ganyan, rice lang. Pero we can do into similar exercises on that other food systems. Sustainability also is one thing because even if you are able to produce in GMO, the need, assuming that you produce food in GMO at the moment, ay yung GMO naman ay napupollute yung soil na nagkakaroon ng nutrient imbalance, it will not be sustainable. Nawawala yung tinatawag natin na intergenerational sustainability or intergenerational justice. Wala nang mapagtangan na fertile soil ng succeeding generations. And to me, from ethical dimensions, we also have a responsibility to retain such integrity of production systems or production resources to succeeding generations. So,
niyo po ba?
My answer there in your tanong is, at the moment, yes, but it's only my personal decision and opinion, is we don't need GMO in the Philippines at the moment, and we can feed our population with alternative technologies and approaches.
So, halimbawa, pinagbawal yan ng gobyerno, kaya ba nating mabuhay? Hindi tayo magugutom?
Sa tingin ko, kaya natin eh. In fact, sabi ko na kanina, yung data ko yung GMO corn ay mga something like, if I remember right, ang sales lang nilang binhin ng GMO corn ay something like 14 billion pesos. Saan nagagaling 14 billion pesos? Mga maghihirap na farmers. At sila ngayon ang binebenta na nila yung lupa nila kasi walang pambayad sa utang. Yung glyphosate na herbicide ay nasa 5 billion pesos per year yan, mga yan. So, ibig sabihin mas malaking gastos kaysa ang mahalaga net income. ang karamihan na nabanggit ko na kanina, to repeat it, ang karamihan na naghihirap sa atin ay farmers and fisher folks, and of course urban poor. Eh, they don't need GMOs kasi mahal ang gastos ang farming ng GMO.
Thank you.
Thank you. Personal opinion ko lang naman yon, pero it has been solidified by experiences so constantly and solidly with farmers in many places in the Philippines.
So sir, question ko lang po, karugtong po nung question ni Sir Ike. Meron po ba tayong datos right now kung gaano po ka-widespread na po ang pag-consume ng mga Pilipino ng GMOs?
Mahirap i-compute yan or i-estimate yan kasi nga contaminated o mixed yan, unlabeled, unsegregated ang mga in-import natin. So, ibig sabihin, yung corn, yung soybeans na in-import natin, at of course, marami yung, kung nag-import tayo ng corn oil from US, galing din sa GMO corn yan. Corn oil or canola oil. At saka mga chocolates na may iba pang kwan. So, ibig sabihin ay
100% ng soybean natin na imported.
Oh, 100% daw, sabi ni Dr. Ted.
Soybean. So, GMO
soybean.
yun.
Sa soybean.
Mm.
So, sir, yung ate po kinakain na taho, malamang GMO.
Yes.
Tama po ba?
Yeah. Para sa ating mga senior, hindi na siguro grabe yun eh. Kasi nasa tail end na tayo. Ang pinag-uusapan na lang natin ngayon ay yung ating mga apo. Mga poko na wala pang isang taon yung isa. No? So, we have to be careful. Okay? Kaya hanggat maaari sana, wag natin ano. In fact, yung food security is a complex issue. One time, nag-lecture na lang ako yung the future of food, yung future food proofing. Ang kailangan ng mundo ngayon kasi ay shift in diet, a diet change. Climate change is diet change. Yun ang thesis ko na at marami na rin ang nagano ngayon. Kasi kung mag-meat-based diet tayo, talagang yun ang maraming delikado. Kaya lang naman kinakailangan tumaas ang grain production. 56% of all grains are fed to livestock to support the meat-loving ng mga tao. And correlated din itong pagtaas ng income ng tao. Pag meron na siyang pera, gusto niya meat-based diet or itong mga kaya tumataas yung Ang naging problema ang tingin ko, Mark, and then addressing this sa mga academician natin, yung thermodynamics, the laws of thermodynamics were only applied in mechanical system. They were not applied in biological system. Kasi from plant to animal protein, you need to feed to feed animals about 6 to 9 kilograms of plant protein to produce 1 kilogram of animal protein. So as we claim that there is tremendous thermodynamic loss of food in that case. Kaya yung claim ngayon na para ma-sustain ang food requirement natin by 2050, pagdating ng populasyon ng 10 billion, increase natin yung food production ng about 60%. That is unsustainable. Tunaw na ang mundo by that time. Kasi nga, ang kailangan nga, yung diet natin, consistent siya. It would help the planet, the people, at saka yung mga nagpo-produce na magsasaka, na magkaroon sila ng income. Which technologies right now, starting sa Industrial Revolution, Chemical Agriculture, na ngayon pumunta tayo sa Gene Revolution na hindi ina-address. Ang nangyari kasi, sorry to say sa mga fellow scientists po, science for the pocket. Kala natin noon corruption yung farm to the market roads, farm to pocket. Ang problema ngayon, science to the pocket, technology to the pocket ang nangyari. So, talagang unsustainable yon. Kaya, the better we scientists realize that GMO, genetic engineering, is bad for us, the better. Kaya kailangan magsama-sama na tayo, mag-unite ang mga scientists in the world na itigil na itong treacherous na technology na ito. Yun lamang po.
Maraming salamat po, Sir Ted. So, meron pa po bang katanungan sa ating pong mga audiences or inquiries? By the way po, ang ating pong mga episodes and previous episodes ay maaari po nating mapanood para po sa mga humahanap po ng references sa ating pong YouTube channel. So ito po ay pinost ko po ang ating link sa ating pong chat box. Ito po ay www.youtube.com/@futureearthph. So lahat po ng ating episodes ay nasa ating pong YouTube channel. Yes, Sir Ike, for the last question, ano pong ating katanungan?
Dok, ito, paano tayo umabot sa ganito na parang hindi naman napansin ng gobyerno, ng Kongreso? Parang, buti nga nandiyan kayo ni Doc Ted, naririnig ko ito eh. But, I don't know, wala sa dyaryo yata ito, wala sa news.
I'm sorry
Ano ba
to
nangyari
say,
yun?
Kuya Ike, tingnan mo naman ang nangyari sa atin ngayon sa Kongreso, sa Senate. Ano? Sila ang punot dulo ng massive corruption in history, di ba?
Tama, sir.
Tiningnan ko yung data sa corruption, walang dumoble ang corruption the last 3 years compared to sa corruption in the last 6 years. Na-compute din namin 8.8 trillion pesos ang total corrupted money for the last 10 years, for the last decade. Yun, I-publish ko nga sa sa pinablish ng Inquirer.net yung aking paper na yun. Okay? So, yun po ang malaking problema natin. Although, there are exceptional countries like Mexico. Sinabi ni Doc, nag-rule na yung kanila Supreme Court, pati yung presidente nila, walang GMO corn. Wala nang GMO corn sa kanila. Ang Russia, ayaw din ng GMO. Binan din nila yung GMO. Ang Europe, marami na rin country sa Europe ang ayaw ng GMO. Okay, so, yun po. Kasi meron namang kailan lang ang GMO? GMO is only about 20 plus, about 5 decades lang. Nabuhay po tayo, ang tao sa mundo, nang walang GMO for the last thousands of years. Kung ano ang reckoning natin. So, we should not fear. We should not be hostage to their claim for food supply, availability, food security, kailangan natin ng GMO. That's a big lie.
Saka Sir Ted, sabi ko nga po, as long as meron po tayong mga politics, senador, na sila po mismo ang nag-convert ng lupa into subdivisions and to other things, hindi po natin masolusyonan ang tanong at question tungkol sa food production. Tama
yan. We have to stop land use conversion. Sabi ko nga, more than 500,000 hectares ng prime rice land ang na-convert na, irretrievably converted. Yun naman ang kailangan na lupa daw para may dagdag, para maging self-sufficient tayo. So, yung mga ganon. But on the other hand, saan ka kukuha ng about 500 billion to irrigate these lands? Because it requires right now about 1 million to irrigate 1 hectare of land. Okay? So, yun na naman po ang ating, on the side, On the other hand, yun na nga, ang claim ko naman, if we just shift to plant-based diet, meron pa rin tayong sufficient na pagkain. Kasi nga, kung mag-import naman ng pagkain, diretso na sa ating tao. Huwag nang ipakain dito sa mga animals.
Tama po. So sa question po ni Sir Marvin Tejada, Sir Tejada, email ko po kayo if interested po kayo maging part po ng Future Earth Philippines. So ayan po, maraming salamat po Doc Chito sa inyo pong naging napaka-insightful po na topic for today. So hindi ko man po kayo naging professor nung college, pero kayo po ay nakikita ko po sa agronomy lab lagi. And anyways po, isa lang po ang masasabi ko po dito po sa topic po natin ngayong hapon. Ito po yung parang key take away ko po. So marahil po ay nararapat na piliin po natin ng isang kinabukasan kung saan ang ating pagkain ay nagtataguyod ng buhay, hindi lamang po ng tubo o profit. At ang tunay po na sukatan ng pag-unlad ay hindi kung ano po ang ating kayang likhain o eksperimento, kundi kung ano kung gaano tayo katagumpay na mamuhay na may pagkakaisa sa kalikasan. And with that note, maraming salamat po sa pagsama po sa amin ngayong hapon. And be safe everyone. Uso po ang Ubot Sipon at muli po tayong magkita-kita next week. Same place, same time, same channel. And you all have a great weekend. Bye for now.
Congrats, Doc Chito. Ah, ala. Dr. Lu. Alay, Dr. Ay, Luli, no? Hmm. Lalo.
Sige po, Ate Marlene, saka Ma'am Luli. Have a great weekend po.